Hi, I'm Sonya White Jaguar. Welcome to White Jaguar Weekend Read, my weekly audiobook series. Today I'm reading my book review of Madly Deeply, The Diaries of Alan Rickman. Let's get started. Quote, Piscean by birth, Piscean in everything I think and do. My life swims one way, my work the other, and yet it's the same breed, the ever-present objectivity. The once remove is invaluable to me as an actor. For the most part, the great danger is lack of surprise, but I recognize that, and disastrous in relationships. Either I spend time keeping an even keel so as to avoid obstacles, or I get knotted up with watching, waiting, imposing. Will I ever just let be? Who puts this invisible telephoto lens over my eyes? It helps me to see, and it makes me blind. What I enjoy as much as anything is to laugh from somewhere way down inside, and that begins to be like buried treasure. Unquote. Alan Rickman, July 1976. Published in October 2022, Madly Deeply, The Diaries of Alan Rickman is a 450-page distillation of private journals the actor consistently maintained from 1993, after he'd achieved fame, to 2015, weeks before his death. Also included are excerpts from the 1970s and 1980s when Alan was journaling sporadically. When it was announced in 2020 that Alan's diaries were going to be published, the prospect of reading something Alan himself had written was thrilling. While living, Alan had never written a book. Early reports stated that Alan had intended for his diaries to be published. However, as the first reviews appeared ahead of the book's release in 2022, that point was questioned. It sounded as if Alan's diaries read merely like an aide-memoire and a dumping ground for his private frustrations. Predictably, media coverage focused on Alan's criticism of his Harry Potter co-stars. While negative sound bites supply tempting clickbait, they don't provide a compelling reason to purchase the book. So, on the eve of publication, Alan's long-awaited diaries looked to be a disappointment. As a result, someone who was hesitant to buy the book messaged me for clarification. Because I've been working with Alan since his death, she wanted to get his perspective from me. Had he intended for his diaries to be published? Does he approve of the book? That's what prompted this book review. I answer these questions and share channeled comments from Alan on the other side. In the introduction of Madly Deeply, editor Alan Taylor answers whether the actor had intended for his diaries to be published. Quote, why he kept a diary is unclear. We do not know whether Alan would like to have seen his diaries published, but he did receive invitations to write books which could have drawn upon the material in them, unquote. Taylor also provides a clear expectation for what readers can hope to gain from the book. Quote, Madly Deeply tells the story of what it meant to be one of the most feted and admired actors in the decades immediately before and after the dawn of the third millennium. There are highs and lows, glowing reviews and bad, performances that were a joy, and others when it seemed that everything that could go wrong did. Reading this book is as close as we can get to being there ourselves and to encountering the real Alan Rickman, unquote. Taylor states that the book was culled from more than 1 million words. Unfortunately, the editing process and the criteria used for selecting passages weren't explained. Like other reviewers, I have mixed feelings about whether these diaries should have been published. Frequent lack of context was disappointing, and Alan's personal shorthand made his meaning difficult to discern at times. I'd hoped to breeze through the book quickly, but it took longer to finish than anticipated because I had to read slowly to ensure comprehension. Nevertheless, the man behind the public image leaped off the pages and immersed me in his world, however brief and hurried his notes. Far from sensationalistic, the book moved me in deep, unexpected ways, and I'm glad I read it. I give the actor kudos for consistently maintaining a diary for more than 20 years, right up until he knew he was dying and no longer had the strength to write. As he was a busy globetrotter throughout his career, I'm amazed he found time to jot down anything. He covered many topics that were fascinating: roles he played, social events with friends and family, home renovations, movie and play reviews, world events, and other observations. In this review, I share some diary entries that stood out to me to show that Madly Deeply contains more depth than the early media coverage suggested. While at times Alan did write only lists of names with brief references to social engagements, the book is so much more than that. Starting off with Alan's movies, I was touched by an entry Alan made while filming Michael Collins, 1996. I found myself pondering what Alan and his character, political leader Eamon de Valera, were feeling at this frightful moment. Quote, 22 August 1995, Kilmainham Jail. 2 minutes in one of the cells and I'm starting to get anxious. What must it have been like? Clear enough in last words, the book given to me by the museum manager. They were all so proud to die. They knew when it was coming and what it was for. This is beginning to feel like something I just have to hand myself over to. It will take care of itself. Hidden forces are very strong. I'm sitting in his cell writing a letter to Michael Collins, the dust filling the slash of sunlight. That glimpse of a changing sky must have meant everything, unquote. Alan's experiences while filming Mesmer, 1994, were some of the most descriptive in the entire book. I felt that I was by Alan's side the whole time he was on set. He played the title role. His entries made me chuckle sometimes and wince other times because of his pain. For brevity's sake, I've selected the entries below to sum up his experience. Quote, 27 September 1993, a day at the top of a flight of stairs, throwing Simon McBurney down, or sliding down the banisters and ripping my pants. 18 October 1993, wet, 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 cold, 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 carriages, freezing hands, crane shots, cold banana soup for lunch, shorter days, earlier darkness, home by 6:30. 24 through 25 October 1993, my back is killing me. 7 weeks of accumulated tension is finally expressing itself. Why was I dreaming about having got myself a Saturday job at Woolworths, unquote. Throughout his career, Alan was at odds with directors, and Mesmer was no exception. While he did an amazing job bringing Mesmer to life, his diaries make it clear that there were problems behind the scenes. I appreciated seeing Alan's reaction to the finished film, which is flawed, and knowing that my impressions matched his. Quote, the film needs more facts and a more definite point of view, and later he added, immediately depressing sense of what it could have been, unquote. 10 years after the release of Alan's first film, Die Hard, 1988, he praised the movie, writing, quote, it still works like none of the others. Real energy, perfect camera work, wit and style, unquote. I was amused by how much Alan was asked about this action flick, which to this day remains popular. When Alan was recovering from prostate surgery in 2006, he wrote, quote, the doctors come round and after dealing with catheters and drainage, finally, nervously get to the point. How did you do the fall at the end of Die Hard? Unquote. Even though many diary entries about the Harry Potter series have been excerpted in the media, I would be remiss if I didn't mention those that meant the most to me. Professor Snape will likely be Alan's most remembered role for years to come. Quote, 7 October 2000. Talk to Joanne Rowling again, and she nervously lets me in on a few glimpses of Snape's background. Talking to her is talking to someone who lives these stories, not invents them. She's a channel, bubbling over with, well, when he was young, you see, this, that, and the other happened. Never, I wanted so-and-so, unquote. As an author, I found this comment insightful, and I appreciated Alan's astute observation. Good writers listen to their story and treat it as a living being that has its own message to convey. Alan observed that J.K. Rowling did this with the Harry Potter books. She wrote the story that wanted to be told rather than forcing it to conform to her vision. Despite his respect for Rowling, many entries showed that Alan had mixed feelings about playing Snape and even considered quitting halfway through. At one point, he felt that he and some of his adult co-stars were underutilized, referring to them as glorified extras, which I agree with. In the entry below, Alan was clearly blowing off steam after a difficult day on the set of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, 2004, the third movie in the series. Quote, 30 July 2003, 7 a.m. pickup, Snape Lupin classroom. The day got off to a fabulous start, with the screen guillotining onto my head, a sudden swift blackout followed by day-long melancholy, not helped by my fairly innocent Warner Brothers won't have that to the Leonardo werewolf with genitals drawing. Alfonso was quietly ballistic with me. I love him too much to let it last too long, so I wailed off set and we sorted it out. He's under the usual HP pressure, and even he starts rehearsing cameras before actors, and these kids need directing. They don't know their lines, and Emma Watson's diction is this side of Albania at times. Plus, my so-called rehearsal is with a stand-in who is French." Unquote. In an earlier entry, Alan had remarked that he didn't see Daniel Radcliffe as an actor and thought he'd become a director or producer. After such seemingly disrespectful comments were publicized in the media, readers were swiftly angered and questioned why Alan's private thoughts were published. However, Alan was very complimentary of this film once he saw the finished product. He wrote, quote, "It is a very grown-up movie, so full of daring that it made me smile and smile," unquote. 4 years later, after a lunch meeting with Radcliffe, Alan wrote that the young star struck him as, quote, "sensitive, articulate, and smart," unquote. About a month after Madly Deeply was published, a news article reported Radcliffe's reaction to the book when he was a guest on talk show Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. Radcliffe told the host, quote, "All the stuff Alan wrote was very lovely and nostalgic reading. His comments about us being like, 'These kids need to learn their lines, it's kind of a nightmare right now,' all of that stuff through to us meeting when I was over here doing a play. It was very sweet to read all of that," unquote. So despite readers' negative reactions to Alan's remarks, Radcliffe wasn't perturbed. He understood the context of Alan's statements. It's unfortunate that Alan didn't provide more detail in his diaries. For example, he records the start of filming some movies with no explanation of how he got the parts. A friend of his appears, but how they met or how long they'd known each other isn't mentioned. Reading the book sometimes exhausted me as I struggled to keep up with Alan's frenetic schedule. I often had to flip back a page or two to verify where Alan was because he was constantly on the move. Where's Waldo today? London? New York? As a homebody, I couldn't maintain his pace. More than once, the actor left clothes behind while packing. He spent a lot of time in airport lounges and remarked, quote, "I wish these lounges weren't so devoted to the bored and boring. Perhaps there could be a door marked eccentrics and weirdos only," unquote. I found his humanness and sense of humor throughout the book endearing. Alan made several entries about books he was reading at the time. When he referenced actor Simon Callow's memoir, Love is Where It Falls, I felt a strong compulsion to read it. A gay man, Callow tells the story of the unconventional friendship he had with theater agent Peggy Ramsey while he was in and out of relationships with men. Alan wrote that the book is, quote, "breathtakingly honest, takes all sorts of chances. His recall is staggering. I can't remember what I was doing yesterday," unquote. Alan called Ramsey, quote, "such a spiritual guide. She talks of not trivializing one's life, too many people, restaurants, and of the Krishnamurti-inspired notion of solitude, so that the mind can wander," unquote. Although I didn't recognize Callow's name at first, his face was familiar when I looked him up. He starred in many popular films like 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Shakespeare in Love, and Amadeus. I read his memoir in between readings of Madly Deeply. It's an extremely well-written and moving story. I understand why Alan loved the book. Afterward, I read samples of Callow's books Being an Actor, about the theater, and Shooting the Actor, about making films. Callow writes prolifically about acting. I believe that his colorful descriptions of the profession are as close as we can get to understanding what Alan also experienced as an actor. Coincidentally, an interview with Alan's godson, actor Tom Burke, appeared in the news while I was reading Love is Where It Falls. Burke mentioned Alan and Callow's book, saying, quote, "It's funny, I remember years ago Alan raving about Simon Callow's memoir, Love is Where It Falls, and Mum asked if he'd ever write a book. He said no and quoted Peggy Ashcroft. I know me and I'm not interested," unquote. That explains why Alan never published anything. However, he made eloquent statements about acting in his diaries that could have been fleshed out and made into a meaningful book. Okay, I'll stop there for today. Join me next week for the conclusion, which includes some channeled comments from Alan himself about the publication of his diaries. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. You can also sign up for my newsletter on my website, sonyawhitejaguar.com, and get notified that way. I send out newsletters twice a month. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.